So I knock on the door, no answer. I said, by any chance, do you have a key? She says, yeah. So she let me in, and I saw the back of the head of her sister lying on a couch. And she said to me, can you please tell her to take off that stupid Halloween mask? Well, it wasn't a Halloween mask. Her dogs and cats consumed part of her face and neck.
Will, thank you for being here today. By way of an introduction, I wanted to provide a brief overview of your law enforcement career. You spent 35 years with the Woodridge, Illinois Police Department. Your law enforcement career began in 1971 as an explorer, and in 1973 you accepted a position as a dispatcher. In 1974, you were hired to serve as a sworn police officer. Your collateral duties included OIC, field training officer, accident investigator, truck enforcement officer, juvenile officer, and detective. In addition to those responsibilities, you served as the coordinator of the Motorola 800 MHz FM Spectra TAC 2-channel radio system. From inception to consulting, installation, and implementation. As a juvenile officer, you served as a board member and president of the DuPage Juvenile Officers Association. You were a board member of the Illinois Juvenile Officers Association, a member of the International Juvenile Officers Association, a founding board member of the DuPage Juvenile Fire Setters Association, a board member of the Will County Juvenile Officers Association, and a member of the DuPage Youth Services Coalition. As a detective, you were a member of the Felony Investigation Assistance Team, FIAT, and the Midwest Homicide Investigators Association. You retired from the Woodridge Police Department in September of 2006. Will, thank you for agreeing to share your story today.
Thank you.
So, tell us why you chose a career in law enforcement and why'd you pick the Woodridge Police Department?
Actually, being an electronics enthusiast and a ham radio operator since I was 9 years old, I saw my career going towards electronics. When I was in high school, I was having a real rough time with math. I had to be tutored in Math 1, algebra, geometry, and I could not get even close to trigonometry and calculus. So at that time, you had to have all those subjects in order to go to school to be either an electronics engineer, some type of work in the electronics industry or sales. And I happened to be at the local Kmart. I was dating a girl that worked there, and one of the security guards asked me if I was interested in the Woodridge Police Department cadet program. And I said, well, what is that? He said, we meet once a week. We have a board of directors. We ride along in the squad cars. We help with various duties of the patrol division. And I would equate what we did back then as volunteers to what paid CSOs are doing presently. So I went to a couple of meetings. I said, this is for me, and sort of headed in that direction. So that was when I was a senior in high school. So when I chose my courses at College of DuPage back in 1971, after graduation from Downers Grove North High, I chose the police science course, and I was aiming towards and eventually graduated with an Associate of Arts in Police Science, which is now known as, I believe it's Associate of Applied Sciences in Law Enforcement, but I'm not totally positive of that. As I continued to be with the Woodridge Police Cadet Program and a very active member, my specialty in electronics sort of moved me into the communications portion. I helped out in the radio room. I wasn't getting paid for it, but I would work shifts with the various dispatchers. They taught me a lot of really valuable information, and when there was an opening for dispatcher, I was selected. And that was probably one of the best things to happen to me, along with 1 year going by and getting sworn in as a patrol officer.
So tell me about the Woodridge Police Department in 1971. How was it staffed? What were some of the functions it
When
provided?
when I began, they moved from a 3-bedroom house in a residential area to a pole building in kind of a undeveloped area that eventually became another residential area. And as the department got bigger, they put a trailer next to the pole building, which became what they called the brass castle, because the chief and the deputy chiefs were in there along with their administrative staff. And they were there until 1986, at which time they moved to the facility on Plaza Drive. And sadly, as we were moving in, we found out that the developer, the architect, and the construction company had serious financial problems. So there were lawsuits involved and a lot of things that didn't get fixed. We were very cramped for space. And just in the last year, maybe year and a half, the police department moved to a beautiful, huge facility almost across the street from the previous facility in Woodridge, in the Woodridge Center area.
So when you started, you're talking about being in a 3-bedroom house when the police department starts. What was, I don't even know if you would know this, the population roughly of Woodridge in 1971?
Maybe 10 or 12,000.
And what do you think it is now, roughly?
35 to 40,000. Wow. And what was interesting about the house was every village entity had a room or an area. We had the kitchen and part of the living room, and the basement was the lockup. We would take people down the stairs and handcuff them to one of the poles in the basement. Public Works was in there, the Park District was in there, and the library had just moved to a house across the street.
Do you have any idea how long the police department functioned in that house?
Well,
prior to you getting there?
The village was incorporated, I believe, in 1959, and I started in 71, and they had just moved into the pole building on 83rd Street.
Wow, that's incredible. Squad cars, how many squad cars did you have at the time? Do you remember by chance?
We had 6 marked patrol cars. There were 3 unmarked cars for the detectives. Mm-hmm. The chief always had his own car, which was usually his personal car that he was compensated with mileage. And the detective cars were usually some kind of seized vehicles or less than maximum performance cars. And I can remember going to court with one of the detectives, and as we were driving, there was a strange noise every time we hit a bump, and he said, "Oh, that's the rear end bottoming out." That was some old Pontiac, I think.
But even when you started, Woodridge had its own dispatch center at the time?
Yes, they did.
Wow.
They dispatched for themselves at that time.
Did Woodridge have a fire department back then?
Woodridge still doesn't have a fire department. They are covered by 3 fire districts: the Lisle Woodridge Fire District, the Darien Woodridge Fire District, and the Lamont Fire District.
And it was the same back then?
No. Oh. It was, at that time, it was only the Lisle Woodridge, and it wasn't even called that. It was called Lisle Fire Protection District, and the Downers Grove Estates Fire Department, which eventually took over the Belmont Fire District.
Wow.
So now it's Lisle Woodridge, Darien Woodridge, and Lamont.
You got a lot of Woodridge history that I'm sure a lot of people don't know about. That's awesome.
Thank you.
So I don't want to make any assumptions, but I'm assuming there was an academy in 1972, 73.
74.
74.
6 weeks.
Okay. Where was that at? Where'd you go?
It was a PTI in Champaign. We stayed in Bromley Hall, and I did for the first 3 weeks, slept there, and then the second 3 weeks I slept in my brother's apartment because he was on summer leave, because this was in summertime, and I went back to Bromley to have my meals, and then stayed in his apartment, which was right across the street from the Armory, where we had our classes.
Okay. So you successfully graduate the academy, you head over to the Woodridge Police Department. Do you remember that first day, first week?
I do, because my training period, so much different than what it is now traditionally. I rode with 1 or 2 seasoned veterans for a week, and then I rode along with a couple of the former cadets that were also police officers. My training time was about a total of 3 weeks.
Wow. And then you get put on your own right after that 3-week period?
Well, I was shadowed, as they called it, but I don't think we had the manpower to really shadow me. But I do remember the day after graduation from the academy, we were on a DUI stop. And at that time, I was very slight and slender. I probably weighed about 112 pounds. And we were on this DUI stop, and the guy was getting hostile and belligerent. And I went to assist my training officer with handcuffing, and I put my 2 hands on his wrist trying to get the cuffs on, and he did a swiping motion and threw me across the highway. And I got up, dusted myself off, went back, and got him handcuffed.
Wow. Wow. Talk about roll call. So did you have a formal roll call
Yes, we
before
did.
you started?
We originally had our roll calls 15 minutes before the start of the shift, and we were compensated for it. And along the years, they eventually eliminated the paid roll calls, so they had roll call right at the start of the shift instead of 15 minutes before. But they were always good because the other shift came in, if they weren't tied up on a call, filled us in on what happened and where the hot spots were. And then if there were anything stolen or any kind of changes in that, they were usually discussed at roll call.
So give me that 30,000-foot perspective of your career, kind of that overview of from patrol officer and all of those specialties. It sounds like you were super active with juvenile law and juvenile enforcement and supporting juveniles in the area.
I was not overly active in making criminal arrests, although I did work traffic. I made a lot of suspension arrests. I didn't stop cars just because I thought they needed to be stopped, where other officers had reasons for stopping cars and searching them and doing those kind of things. Although I did on occasion when it appeared to be, justified on my part. I moved along. My areas of expertise were seen by the supervisory and the staff, and I was pleasantly surprised when the chief of police asked me to take the 800 megahertz radio project in my hand, because at the time I was in investigations and I had pretty much free reign of where I needed to go. I always handled my calls. I was available for call out, and I was almost exclusively on juvenile calls. They very rarely called me on like a bad check or somebody in custody or something that didn't involve a juvenile. But anytime there was any type of situation where a child was either a victim or an offender, I was contacted. And I can tell you that I can't even keep count of how many times at 10:30 at night, when the kids are returned to their custodial parents or come back from the step parents, they make a disclosure. Sometimes it happened at a hospital in Chicago. Sometimes it happened at home. And I can remember spending a lot of time at Edward Hospital in Naperville that had a specialty unit for interviewing child victims. So between doing that, handling the radio system, and then eventually I was in investigations during 2 periods of time, from 1983 to 1992, and then from 2001, right around the time of 9/11, until 2005, when I went back to the street for a year, and then retired in September of 2006.
You end up at another agency at some point?
Fast forward to 2010. I was offered a position with the Lyons Police Department in Cook County. They needed somebody to boot vehicles that had excessive parking tickets. Well, the chief at that time said, "Well, you have police experience." I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Technically, this is a civilian position, but if you wouldn't mind going to a refresher course, we will make you sworn. You'll carry a firearm. You'll be able to assist, with criminal cases, but your main duties would be booting vehicles that had excessive tickets or had other village ordinance violations. So I took care of that. And instead of having to go to a 1 month course at Triton College, which is where they had the refresher course, I did it online. And I probably should have taken the Triton College course because it took me 3 weekends, all Saturday and all Sunday. And the last day of the refresher course was on Labor Day. And when I answered the last question on the last exam, all of a sudden my printer started printing, and I understand that the chief or the training officer's printer started printing, and it showed that I had graduated the refresher course.
Wow.
And that at that time, they took me down to the range and certified me as sworn.
So when you look back, what are some of the high points of your career?
Some of the things I did in patrol and investigations, patrol mostly traffic stops, investigations, some horrendous cases, and routine calls that turned in more than something that was routine.
Are there any particular traffic stops from your time in patrol that kind of stand out in your memory?
There is one particular one. I work traffic and I also work patrol, but unfortunately due to manpower, the traffic car was generally considered the floater and got assigned as the second car on two-man calls. So when I was able to work traffic, I did. So one of my pet peeves were people changing lanes without their turn signal. Everybody hates that. So I followed a car for about a mile, mile and a half, made their lane changes, made a traffic stop on the car, walked up to the driver, rolled down the window. First thing he said was, "What the F do you want?" And I said, "Excuse me?" He goes, You're taking up my time. What do you want?" I said, "Hold on 1 second." He kind of looked at me bewildered. I walked backwards to my squad car, got in my squad car, closed the door. Got out of the squad car, walked back up again. And I said to the motorist, as I usually said, "The reason why I'm stopping you is because you made 3 lane changes without using your turn signal. Do you generally do this?" He goes, "When I think about it." I said, "Let me ask you a question. If I were to let you go today, as long as your insurance and your driver's license were good, would that make any difference on how you're going to do this in the future, how you're not going to do this?" He goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Could I see your license and your insurance?" He gave it to me. I said, "I'll be right back." Went back to the car, ran the license, the insurance. We only had cards to look at that time. It was obviously valid, and I walked up. And this is before we had to write mandatory warnings when that law came out that you had to do traffic stop cards and all that. So this was way before that. So I walked up to the violator, handed him his license and insurance. I said, "Sir," I said, "everything checks out." I said, "I don't see any moving violations on your record. Your insurance is good. I want you to have a nice evening." He goes, "You're not ticketing me then?" I go, "No, I have no reason to ticket you because hopefully our encounter here made you change the way that you're going to be driving in the future." He goes, "I have never, ever been stopped and not been ticketed. So this is a first for me." And this was a guy maybe in his late 30s, early 40s. So maybe 20, 30 minutes go by and the sergeant calls me in. And he said, "You stopped Mr. Jones at 75th Street and such and such." Go, "What happened?" I said, "Well, it was kind of interesting. I played a little psychology and explained to him what I did in that." And he goes, "He called and said that you were most polite, courteous officer he's ever encountered, and he couldn't believe that you didn't give him a ticket." I said, "Oh, that's cool." I said, "Make sure you remember that when you do my evaluation." So that was the most memorable traffic stop.
What about any incidents or cases that you investigated?
I got called to an officer's nightmare known as an unknown problem. And I think we all know what an unknown problem is. We don't know what it is. So I go to one of our apartment complexes, and there's this elderly woman standing outside, and she said, "I just can't get my sister to talk to me. She's wearing the stupid Halloween mask, and the dogs are barking, and I just don't know what her problem is. So I said, when was the last time you talked to her? She goes, oh, about a week ago. I said, did she say anything strange or unusual, or was there anything, that came to your attention? She goes, well, she said she had a cold. Okay, fine. So I knock on the door, no answer. I said, by any chance, do you have a key? She says, yeah. So she let me in, and I saw the back of the head of her sister lying on a couch, and she said to me, can you please tell her to take off that stupid Halloween mask? Well, it wasn't a Halloween mask. Her dogs and cats consumed part of her face and neck because she had pneumonia, and she was literally skeletal from about her mid-neck up to maybe just past her chin. And I said, no, you need to leave now. I said, I'm sorry to say your sister is deceased, and we're going to have to make arrangements here. She goes, well, what did she have? I said, I think she had pneumonia. And that's how I left it with the sister.
Yeah. Wow. What about juvenile cases? Any juvenile cases stand out in your mind?
I had a young man who had a problem with hard drugs. And on several occasions, I arrested him. He went to the juvenile home, which is kind of hard to do back then, to get somebody incarcerated. I know it's even worse now. Mm-hmm. But his parents were very appreciative. And I would stop in the house on occasion. Sometimes he would be there, sometimes he wouldn't. And I spoke to his younger brothers and sort of built up, I don't know if you call it a friendship or just a kinship. I was a local officer and I stopped by, and the parents were very grateful for that. And fast forward maybe 20 years, maybe a little longer, both mom and dad were divorced. They became friends of mine on Facebook. The juvenile, who is now an adult, became a friend of mine on Facebook and said to me that I was the most influential person of authority that he had ever met in his life, and he thanked me for what I was able to do for him. And so, occasionally I'd see messages, and he was with a woman, they had a child, and seemed like things were going, pretty well. And then I got a message from the mom and the dad at the same time that their son passed away. He, even though he'd been on the wagon for a number of years and had been sober, he had a bad trip and it killed him.
Wow.
And it killed me. It was, very hard. It tugged at my heart. So.
Back when you were on the job, was there school resource officer, DARE officer, or anything like
Yes.
that back then?
We did have a DARE officer. We had a school resource officer that worked at Downers North and Downers South, because Woodridge didn't have a high school. They fed into Downers North and South, and it depended if the brothers and sisters went there. The resource officer worked Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at South, and worked Tuesday and Thursday at North. I also worked with the Downers Grove officers that were assigned to each one of the high schools. The deans were terrific. If the officers weren't available, the deans were great to work with. And even the secretary at Downers South, she was a resource too. There were things that she answered for me that I didn't have to bother the resource officer or anything. They were, the SRO, resource, DARE officer, education. If I was in a school, it meant something was wrong. Somebody either had violated something or I needed to interview them. And I built a very good relationship with most of the schools. A few of them were a little bit hard to deal with, but when they found out what my intentions were, and after speaking to other officers that I had my job to do, they were very good to work with.
So what is one of the things that kind of piqued my interest was this Fire Setters Association. Yes. So what drove that? Was there a particular incident or incidents?
We had a number of youngsters that were starting fires. Most of them were just like small burnings, or to burn the bush, or, their comforter on their bed or something. And then we had some larger cases. So a Lisle Woodridge firefighter was very devoted to the program, And there was a Darien Woodridge firefighter who was also very interested. So they started this association, and we did trainings. And ultimately, before I retired, within the last year that I was in patrol, I conducted with Bob Farley, who's a retired Cook County Sheriff's deputy, who was an instructor in juvenile specialty, ran a 40-hour course for the arson investigators, not only of Darien Woodridge and Lyons Woodridge, but of several other fire departments that had sworn arson investigators. And when the course was completed, they all became certified juvenile officers, which under juvenile law, when a juvenile is being interviewed, there must be 2 juvenile officers present. One to do the interview, or a regular detective to do the interview, and a juvenile officer to protect the rights of the juvenile. So this opened up a whole new world for them. I'm not sure what the outcome was, or even if the association is still in existence or not.
Were you ever a part of an incident or on an incident or a call where you got that feeling that just something just wasn't right about it? I mean, you talked about the one where the sister's saying, "Can you have her take her mask off?"
Right.
But other than that,
there were a couple of domestics that just didn't seem right, where the wife wouldn't disclose, but she had bruises, or the husband had some cuts or he was bleeding, and through some interviewing and being very patient with these people, we find out that there was a history of things going on, and it wasn't just tripping or bumping your head against a closet door or something like that. So I just learned, after receiving a lot of training in nonverbal behavior through John Reed, and I went through their 2 courses and a bunch of other courses, to listen to people and to watch their movements and try to analyze what they were saying, whether they were being deceptive or not. So
when you look back, what are some of your best memories from your time on the job?
I got Juvenile Officer of the Year, 1992. I got an award from the American Legion at the same time, and I also got the DuPage County Juvenile Officers Officer of the Year award. That was very enriching. I'm trying to think of a couple other ones that I might have gotten, but it seemed like when I was pulled out of juvenile because of a shortage of manpower and patrol, that I was given some acclaim for the things I did. Oh, including the 800 megahertz radio system. I got an award of merit that one of my supervisors nominated me for, and received a very nice plaque because of that.
How about any stories related to well-known individuals?
John Wayne Gacy. I was working afternoons that particular shift, and I was assigned to work security around the prison in Crest Hill, known as Stateville. Most people think it's in Joliet, but it's in Crest Hill. So I was in my squad car along with possibly up to 50 other squad cars, keeping people back because there were a lot of anti-death penalty individuals that were protesting. And our job was to keep them under control, to make sure that the gates weren't being compromised or anything like that. And when it was announced that he was deceased, there was a crowd of people that were glad that he was executed. And of course, the anti-death penalty people started yelling, screaming, and we were able to quell all that down. And then everybody split, and then we left.
Were they doing it like at midnight back then? Is that how they?
No, I think it was around 9 o'clock.
At night or in the morning?
At night.
At night.
It had just gotten dark. Must have been in the warmer month, but I'm not sure.
Do you recall how he was put to death? Was Stateville an electric chair or gas chamber? Do you have any idea? I don't know.
I think he was lethal injection.
Lethal injection.
But I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not positive.
Yeah. Huh. Was there someone in your career that you considered to be a mentor?
There were actually several of them, but the one particular individual, actually I met when he was on the rescue squad. Before the fire department had an ambulance, the police department had a rescue squad, which was driven by volunteers. And if we had an ambulance call and we needed them, we had to call them on the phone. Most of them worked nights, we called them during the day, and then the ones that worked days, we called at night. And there was one particular individual who was always very interested in the job, and he rode with me on several occasions. He got hired as a police officer and went through the ranks pretty rapidly, became sergeant. He was a excuse me, a commander at one point, and then a deputy chief. And he had always advocated for me. He was a great guy to work for. He was somebody that I say could wake up in the morning and look at himself in the mirror, look at his face in the mirror. There was also,
Do you want to share his name?
was Ed Kelter,
Okay.
who actually retired many years ago, and he moved to the Las Vegas area and worked in private security. Okay. Another supervisor who I originally had as my sergeant and eventually became a deputy chief was Dick Harrison. And Dick is still alive and lives either in Kentucky or Missouri, I'm not sure where. And his daughter lives nearby and visits him. He's in rehab, and he has to remain in there because of a lot of physical problems. But he's another supervisor that was always very supportive of me, along with Ed Cienko was my sergeant in detectives and in patrol. I had another sergeant, Chris Marima, who was very supportive. And they were always very supportive of me, mostly because of the fact that I knew juvenile work. I liked doing it. I would guide them along, and I even taught a course for all the sergeant. It was a mandatory course on juvenile law and procedure. And they knew that I understood that stuff, and they were glad to have me on their shifts and rewarded me with, lunchtime of my choosing and special squad car to drive. I mean, how much could they really do?
Yeah.
Those were a couple of individuals who were just really great to work with.
So you start as an explorer in 71, you become a sworn officer in 74, you retire in the early 2000s. Over that course of time, 35 years, involved in law enforcement in some capacity, what's the biggest change that you saw? Changes?
Computers and technology, radios, things that help investigations, investigative tools. The internet was a huge thing. And again, I've been gone 19 years, and the things that have happened since then are phenomenal. At that time, when I retired, we had one report that we did on the computer, and it was like a general incident report. And what was cool at that time was you could start it in the car, you could save it, you can go in the station, work on it, and go back in the car and work on it, and that was it. Well, now everything is computerized, I understand. Parking tickets, traffic tickets, arrests, you only have to enter a name once. Back in the day, if I had a DUI, it took me 5 hours. And now I guess they can knock them out in 20 minutes, if they blow.
So let's kind of stay on that technology piece and even kind of branch it out a little bit more. What was the equipment in the car when you started? What did the squad car look like?
Were 2 radios, okay? One was the regular dispatch radio, which was a VHF simplex that we were on with 11 other towns. And then there was a radio that was given to us by the state called an ISPERN radio. And that strictly monitored the chase channel, the crimes in progress channel. There was a switch box for lights and siren. And that was pretty much it. A shotgun in the front. And now it's like a regular mobile office. I've seen a few of the newer cars, and just phenomenal between the printers, and they have carbines in the front, and some departments, ours, turn the shotguns into less than lethal beanbag rounds. Mm-hmm. So they had those in the trunk, they had the carbines in the front, and just as I was retiring, that was a transition that was occurring.
So you're talking about a radio, you have 2 radios, you have ISPERN, and then you have your primary police channel. Any other channels on that other radio?
Yes, we had Public Works, which we used for our talk around channel, which we were supposed to not use during the day, but we did anyway.
Yeah.
Fire department, we had both fire channels on there. We had Bolingbrook on there, which was very, very helpful. And there were times when Bolingbrook would say, Woodridge officer at 83rd and Janes Avenue, and then one of us would pipe in there, yeah, go ahead. You know, can you check for such and such? So that was very handy. They didn't have, all their cars were not equipped with 800 megahertz radios. They had one car, and it was usually the sergeant's car, and we never had it turned on, so we couldn't really call them.
So basically a car with, I mean, you're looking at all together, maybe 5 radio channels compared to today, where you got on their hip hundreds of radio channels. Did you have portable radios when you started?
When I first started, there were 2 portable radios. A department issued radio that one person who was like the floater car carried, and then I had my own radio. I had always had my own radio, all the way up to the time that we went to 800 megahertz. And then I used the department radio, and of course now it's totally Starcom. So
now Woodridge was, for my entire career, always known as the 1911 department. Were they carrying 1911s when you started?
They were carrying 38s and 357s.
Okay.
I had a K38 with a 6-inch barrel, and that thing was a hog. And then I eventually went to, I think, a Trooper, Colt Trooper. And then sometime, I think, in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, they started carrying the 1911 45 cal.
Okay.
And we carried those. I had originally had a Colt, and then I retired with a Kimber. And the Kimber was a fantastic weapon, and I loved it.
Yeah, yeah. So when you look back at the job and you look back over your career, do you think it had an impact on your family?
It did.
How so?
I was married and divorced twice. I had 3 wonderful children, one of whom passed away in 2022. And it had a lot of effect because if I wasn't around, my spouses had to keep busy. The first marriage with the young children, the second marriage with not being bored and staying home and going out and doing things. And eventually our relationships became unstable and things didn't go right, and we decided to split up. And one time, my first wife decided to split up, and the second time I made the decision to split up.
Was it just the demands of the job, the type of work you were doing? Was it a financial issue primarily, or?
It was me not being around, not being there, not making decisions, and them being bored.
When you look back at your career, do you have any regrets?
I wish I would have continued my education. I had an opportunity to get a bachelor's degree at no cost, and I forget what that program was called. A lot of the officers and civilians took advantage of that, and that might have helped me at retirement getting different jobs, having at least a bachelor's degree. So I wish I would have continued, but I didn't like attending school. I liked teaching it. I liked teaching juvenile procedure. I liked teaching about the radio system and how to operate, properly in that, but I was very bored attending class.
Do you miss the job?
I miss the good parts about the job, but I don't miss the blatant favoritism, game playing, and Monday morning quarterbacking. That's what I don't miss.
So what are you doing now?
Presently, I retired 6 years ago from a local hospital. I was a security officer. And during the 6 years I was with them, I probably dealt with 100 times more combative and violent people than I did the entire 35 years I was a sworn officer. And I'm staying very, very busy now. I a licensed ham radio operator. I've had my license for over 50 years. I teach ham radio. I do examinations because the FCC doesn't do them anymore. And I also do enforcement. If there's violations, I document them and they're reported to the proper authorities. So between the 5 clubs I belong to and the 7 clubs that I assist in giving exams, I'm busy just about every weekend.
Do you have any advice for someone who might be considering becoming a police officer, or maybe somebody who's looking at the decision to retire?
I used to be on a kind of a recruiting team that encouraged youngsters to join the police department. And I'm sorry to say this, but I'll dissuade anybody that's thinking about a police career, even though the pay is very, very good, especially for lateral entry, because of the fact that you're probably not going to get backed up. Your own department may help you, but if the chips are down, the press is going to eat you up, and things are just going to go sideways. Think about another career. What else are you good at? Are you a good house painter? Do you like working in a hardware store? It used to be a great job, but now it's very, very sad.
So, I feel to ask this question, and I apologize for that, but what made you decide to retire?
I had a job lined up that was going to pay me more than what I was going to get for my pension, because my first ex-wife got half of my pension. So I had to get a job that had health insurance, that I was able to pay the mortgage, that I was able to pay my bills. And that job came along, and for the first year and a half, it was wonderful. And then we had that housing issue in 2008 where everything just went literally down the drain, and they had to let me go from that job. So I was unemployed for a while. I had a couple of different jobs, and then I got hired at the hospital in 2013. And very stable job, but very violent, very combative. So I never got, one time I got injured. I fell off of a stool and I hurt my elbow. But we'd have guys with broken fingers and bruises and, stuff from dealing with combative individuals and, having to keep these people in control because they were hurting the doctors and nurses. And it was up to us to keep them safe.
Have you seen, you're bringing up violence at the hospital. Do you think the level of violence that police officers are facing today compared to 20 years ago has significantly changed?
I think it's gotten worse. I think because of the lack of respect that police officers are faced with, there are things that they absolutely can't do. But when it comes down to making an arrest and affecting it properly, that as long as they follow procedure, they have nothing to worry about. But if you go over that line, then you're going to have to answer for it. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I was never in a position that I had to use my firearm other than dispatching a few animals that got hit in the roadway. But I know that officers that having been involved in shootings, went through a lot of crisis and trauma, and some of them didn't even come back to the job. Not on our department, but on other departments in nearby.
What's your experience with that? Were you a part of a group that assisted officers in dealing with that emotion?
I was a member of the Northern Illinois Critical Incident Stress Debriefing Team. Went through a lot of training dealing with people that had issues, and especially when children were involved and when children died or died a violent death, we would have these debriefings. And sadly, the people that it affected the hardest were not really participating. I could see them tearing up in their eyes, but they wouldn't talk about it. And fortunately or unfortunately, anything that happened in that room, we couldn't talk about outside of the room. And there were people that desperately needed help. They were suffering from what we call PTSD now, and they weren't getting the help. So I'm not sure if CISD is still out there. I don't know if they still swoop down on departments that have these kind of issues, but there's more of that violence going on now. I would hope they still do, but I don't know.
Yeah. Will, I want to thank you for spending your afternoon with me and sitting down and agreeing to share your journey with the badge with us.
My pleasure. Absolutely. Thank you, Jason.